when I was in Palestine last time, I actually wasn't with Christian Peacemaker Teams, but it's when I became familiar with them because we worked side by side. We did a lot of the same things. We went and accompanied the children as they went to school. We patrolled the same areas. Aaron Jorgensen, who's in the back of the room, was there with me. Spent 2 months in Hebron. This was one day that we were walking through the marketplace, and these soldiers started. This was in Hebron's divided. I don't know. A lot of you know, so I'm gonna be really quick. Hebron is divided into 2 different areas. One of them is Palestinian controlled, and then there's a smaller area that's Israeli controlled, and it has checkpoints all the way around it. So when we talk about checkpoints, we're talking about the areas that are divided. Normally, the big checkpoints divide the Palestinian controlled areas from the Israeli controlled areas. So this was in a Palestinian area of the market. Soldiers were patrolling outside of where they normally kind of patrol, and people just started throwing fruit at them. And this boy was actually standing behind a cart, and the soldiers grabbed him and detained him. People were throwing fruit off of his cart, and he was the cart vendor. And so we, as internationals that were doing peace work in the area, just trying to monitor the situation, started following him to see where he was going, why he was being detained. As we were following him, the soldiers threw flash grenades at us. And then we ran into CPT because we had something else happening back at the house. We ran into CPT and told him the name of the boy, where he was being detained. And so CPT took it from there on and followed up on this young man's detainment. And I'm not really sure what ended up happening with him. I'm sure he was later on released, but he was under 12. So we're talking about young children being detained within Palestine. Go ahead and flip to the next one. Here's some, I don't know if you can see them, 2 more young boys. This is outside of the school that were being detained. And so sometimes CPT just goes and takes pictures, and we just stand there a lot and ask them things like, why are they being detained? How long are they being detained for? Why are you holding them? And just kind of ask the soldiers over and over and over again sometimes. Until they let them go, because a lot of times the soldiers are just detaining these boys because they're angry with them for one reason or another, and not for any legal reason. Go ahead. Same boys. This was in the souk. This day they were stopping any Palestinian male between the ages of maybe like 15 to 40 and making them all show their IDs. At one point in time, there was probably, there's a whole line of men. I mean, they just completely shut it down, and every single person get against the wall, give me your ID, patting them down. And it was really humiliating for people that are just trying to get to work or just trying to come home or just shopping. And this is really common to happen. And just something that I realized when I was looking at scenes like this is what that does to your human dignity, what that does to your pride, to have somebody who's in absolute control of you, and you can do nothing about it. If these guys were to fight back or to speak up, they would immediately be arrested. So they just have to do whatever the soldiers tell them all the time. And this is a picture of the best picture of apartheid that I could get. This young boy is walking down this path. It used to be gravel. They paved it while we were there because he's Palestinian. So it used to be like a dirty path. Now it's got some pavement there. Then this is the actual road. So the Israelis walk on this side. This young schoolboy has to walk on this side because he's Palestinian. And then these both lead to the exact same place. There's a checkpoint outside of
the Ibrahimi Mosque.
The Ibrahimi Mosque.
Yep.
Go ahead. And so we spent a lot of time standing outside of the school, watching the children go to school, getting tear gassed every single day. There was kind of this game that the soldiers and the children would play. Usually what I found would happen is the children would be going through the checkpoint, going to school, and then, like clockwork, this military jeep would pull up, and instead of just like 2 soldiers by the checkpoint, now there'd be like 6 or 7. And the guys that jumped out of the jeep, they were like the crowd control. soldiers, or I don't really know how to describe them, but they would be like kind of puffy and cocky and come out and strut around, and maybe the boys, the young school children would throw stones, and they would like pretend like they're batting them or dodging them. It's like this, they're like playing this game with these kids. And then at some point in time, game was over, and they would just start shooting tear gas at these kids and yell, get to school, and shooting more and more tear gas at them. So we watched a lot of that. And so through that, there's a lot of trauma. I mean, there's like a huge level of trauma with the children within Hebron and also the rest of Palestine. And so some of the time on my day off, I would do artwork with the kids in the center right next door to where we lived. And these are some of the kids drawing. These are some of the same girls. Go ahead and flip it. And then one day, as I was leaving, so that was the girls and the boys sat in different rooms. So sometimes there'd be a couple older boys, and they would go and draw by themselves. And one day when I was leaving, one of the older boys gave me this drawing, and he said, "Oh, this is for you. You can have this." And you can see there's Palestinian flags, and it says like "Free Palestine." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And I started walking out, and as I walked away, I flipped it over. Go ahead. And this picture he drew on the back. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it says, "This is Israel, and this is Palestinian. This is a soldier shooting the Palestinian and him bleeding." And I got that from a young Palestinian boy. So, so that was my kind of rounding out what I'd been doing in Palestine. And so the last time I was in Palestine, it was really difficult. But I knew that I was called to do this type of work, and I'd been familiar with CPT and how they operate, and I decided if I wanted to do this kind of work, I needed to do it in a way that I didn't come back with a lot of trauma. I was with a group that was really rooted in nonviolence and had good support for the people that they were working with, and so I joined CPT. And over like the next year and a half, went through the process of training and becoming a member of CPT. And through that discernment, somehow decided I wasn't going back to Palestine, then I felt called to go to Kurdish Iraq. And so that's where I work now. I work there 6 months a year. And Kurdistan's divided by 4 different countries. It's part of Syria, part of Iran, part of Iraq, and part of Turkey. So I'm in the Iraqi Kurdistan. And just so you can get the landscape, this is kind of what Kurdistan looks like. These are some of my friends dancing on a mountaintop during Nowruz, which is the Kurdish New Year. Go ahead. And yeah, these are just, I'm just going to flip through some pictures so you kind of understand what it looks like in Kurdistan. This is a man selling tea on the side of the road. Our team has stopped to buy tea from him. Go ahead. This is a Christian cemetery on the mountainside. This is some people in traditional Kurdish clothes. You can't see them very well, but the men wear the baggy pants and the women the really pretty dresses. And that was in Lalish, which is the holiest site for the Yazidis. So we visited there. Go ahead. And this is the picture out of my window in the town that I live in, Suleimani. The mosque, and there's a big fancy hotel in the background. So I live in a city that's got as many people as here in Des Moines. Go ahead. And this is what it looks like when we don't have electricity. So being in Kurdistan, they get all their money from oil revenues, and they sell a lot of oil contracts. There's a lot of corruption in the government. They don't have to actually disclose the details of the contracts that they sell, and they haven't paid Kurdistan hasn't paid its government workers in 9 months now, and 70% of the people work for the government. They also don't provide electricity, except for the main power plant maybe works like 6 hours a day, and then you have a local generator that'll work a few hours, and then you usually have about 8 hours where you don't have electricity. So that was us doing work in the dark. So CPT, what we do in Kurdistan, we do a few different things. One of them is we accompany villages that are having their land stolen by ExxonMobil. So after the U.S. went in and ousted Saddam, that was a good thing for the Kurds because Saddam had been massacring the Kurdish people, so they got to have their autonomous region in the north. But along with that came all the contracts for the oil and the side deals, and there's a lot happening where Exxon is coming in and mining and drilling areas and taking it away from farmers that have been on the land for hundreds and hundreds of years. Go ahead. So this is Kakmiro, and he's mayor of a small town called Haji Ahmed, and that's his son. And we went, he called us so that we would come and see what Exxon has done or had been doing to the farmland around his house, and they were trying to get compensation from the land that had been stolen. Go ahead and click. This is what Haji Ahmed looks like. Go ahead. So these are like poor rural farmers that we're talking about. Go ahead. More Haji Ahmed. And this is Miro took us up to the mountaintop and was showing us exactly where they'd been drilling and how it had poisoned all the land around, because when they drill for the oil, it like releases some sort of a poison gas. They have to burn it off. I guess you guys, the pipeline folks, probably know a lot more about this than maybe I do, but there's some sort of gas that comes out.
Methane.
Yeah, and he was just pointing at all the olive trees that had been killed and all the vines that had been killed. Go ahead. And this area right here is where they actually drilled. And this down here is the actual spot, and it's capped right now. So they found oil, they capped it off for later whenever they might need oil. And this whole area here used to all be farmland, and now it's all complete rock. Like if you dug with a shovel, I don't even know how deep they made it with all this rock. And once they drilled this area up here, they decided that the farmers could have this land back. So they took all the dirt and filled it full of rock and now gave it back. So this is Muhammad, who's on our team, sitting with Kakmiro. We're writing up a paper for somebody in the parliament so they can ask for their compensation for the land from ExxonMobil. And then we took a delegation to that spot. So these are different things that CPT does. We help work within the local government. We help do accompaniment, and we also do delegations. This is another thing we do. We accompany people that are, this is a demonstration outside of a prison. Somebody's being detained indefinitely because he was a member of the police force who spoke out against the government. Go ahead. So we went and documented and took photos of this demonstration. Go ahead. That's me. And this was pictures of a demonstration that happened in 2015, the teachers' demonstration. There's a monastery in the middle of Suleimani, and when ISIS came, a lot of the Christians fled and they didn't know where to go, and hundreds of Christians showed up in Suleimani at this small monastery, and then they had to be housed. So we're talking like their chapel is this big, and it had like maybe 100 people living in it. It was pretty overwhelming for the new pastor that was living there, the priest. So this last year they built these containers inside the courtyard so that people could live inside these containers, and they're not very big. Go ahead and flip it. That's the inside of the living room of one of these containers, so it's like the size of a small trailer. Go ahead. People outside. And so with these people, CPT did an art project where they had refugees draw pictures of what their life was like or something that represented them. And there was a big art show in Canada, and we went to go visit these artists, and some were living in this little container village. And this was another picture that somebody drew, and this was her dragging this cross, and we asked her what this was, and she said, when I had to flee, I couldn't take anything with me except for my faith. So that's a picture of her dragging across the desert. And this is Women's Day at the local refugee camp, one of them, Arbat, which is a huge refugee camp. And they built a women's, it was the first women's market in Kurdistan, was built within this refugee camp, and so we went to support these women and document it in some of their shops. They sold things outside. And then there was traditional Kurdish dancing. And then the final thing we do is we do a lot of training. We trained a whole group of people to become members of CPT. Usually training is only held in Chicago, but it's really difficult for people to get visas to come to the US if you live in Iraq. And so CPT is really engaged in undoing oppressions and trying to make things as fair and balanced as accessible as possible. So we trained a bunch of people who are actually Kurds to be a part of their own team in Kurdistan, which is a model that they've been trying to explore and expand. Like here, when I think about nonviolence training, it's something that I go to a nonviolence training, so I know how to be nonviolent when I'm at a protest, or so I know how to be nonviolent in a large group. But there, the nonviolence training we do is a lot more intensive, and it's really just how to get through your everyday life. So we found that people really find that important. I really felt like it wasn't my job to judge somebody who's faced oppression that I've never faced before, but I didn't have a problem telling the soldiers not to shoot tear gas at them.
Yeah, what
we're talking about is like an extremely unbalanced scale if we're talking about violence.
Yeah.
So like when the soldiers come up in their Jeeps and their full Kevlar and their military gear, and they're pointing weapons at children and egging them to throw rocks at them, a small child's automatic reaction is going to throw a rock at them. Like, I mean, if it was here in the States, that would happen. Children do that sort of thing. But I don't think the U.S. should arm anybody. I don't know. Like, I think more guns is not the answer. Yeah.
I mean, would they welcome it?
Sure they would. I mean, it's also really difficult when you're there talking to people that's like, the U.S. came and blew up this whole region, and now they're leaving us to pick it all up on our own. Like, what do we do now with these pea shooters? Well, you should go on a delegation. I really do think, like Dave was saying earlier, like when he says, like, if you don't believe me, go and see it for yourself. Like, there's several different areas CPT works in. There's even if you don't feel like you want to leave and go somewhere crazy. Like the CPT does a delegation on the borderlands here between here and Mexico. If you want to see like what a wall looks like, you can even just go to Mexico. I mean, it'll change your perspective on the world going on one of these delegations for sure.